Well, hello, good afternoon. Thank you for joining us for today's webinar. I know there's a couple of people still rolling in, but I'll go ahead and get us started. So my name is Jaslyn Jones. I'm a programs associate here for CSG South. Thank you for attending today's webinar, AI and Emerging Tech, Legal Risk and Mitigation, hosted by CSG South Staff Alliance for Intergovernmental Leadership Committee. If you are unfamiliar with SAIL, SAIL is a staff-only committee of CSG South made up of state, legislative, executive, and judicial branch employees with the purpose of providing informational content catered to educating government staff while also providing opportunities to network with your peers across the South. So if you'd like to learn more about SAIL, more about CSG South, please feel free to reach out to me or visit our website. A few things to note before we get started. This session is being recorded. Participants may use the Q&A function. We welcome all audience participation. Sorry. We will review those questions at the end of the presentation. There'll also be a short survey that will go out at the end of the presentation that we would appreciate if you would share your feedback with us. So for today's session, we're going to examine how legal risks associated with AI are evolving, which areas of state operations are most affected, and what trends officials should monitor. So to walk us through the discussion, we have Dr. Michael Barker and Andrea Booker. Dr. Barker, I'll let you introduce yourself.
All right. Thanks, Jaslyn. Yes, I'm Michael Barker. I'm principal research faculty at Georgia Tech, and I've been in IT ever since 1995 when I started my own company. And I've been in cyber since really the inception of cyber, working with clients to provide anywhere from small to medium-sized companies to Fortune 100, 500 companies, both public and private, with cybersecurity services. What I like to do is I assist them with their cybersecurity posture. I perform assessments of their gaps and then help them create a framework and a roadwork towards compliance, whether that's like ISO 27001, NIST, cybersecurity framework, etc. The majority of my work now really is with defense suppliers and contractors, because they have to be compliant with this it's an old requirement, but it's finally become law, called CMMC, and they have to be compliant in order to maintain and gain future contracts. So that's a little bit about me.
Andrea?
Hi, all. Happy to be here. I'm Andrea Booker, like Jasmine said. I am a corporate associate at Kirkland and Ellis. I advise on just legal matters and mostly mergers and acquisitions. I earned my JD from University of Houston, and I've been practicing for the past year. I first started researching AI and just like the legal developments of AI during law school, and I have been keeping up with it ever since.
Thank you. And so thank you for introducing yourselves. And with that, I'll pass it over to Dr. Barker, who's going to get us started with our first presentation.
All right. Can you see that?
Yes.
Okay. So what I'm compacting here in about a 30-minute time frame is something that I unpack usually over a day or 2 days. So we're going to keep it short, simple, and if anybody has any questions or follow-up, and I believe we're going to try to make these slides available. But anyway, we're going to talk about AI and emerging tech with legal risk and hopefully some mitigations. And if I can get my screen to work here. The usual disclaimer, the views are my own views expressed here. They're not anybody else's views. Don't consider this to be legal advice. Ask your lawyer. And I will say that numerous times throughout the presentation, that always make sure when you're talking about AI that you have legal involved. So it's great that we've got Andrea afterwards to talk about some of that. And none of this, we are vendor neutral. We do not recommend any particular solutions at Georgia Tech with our clients. We do help them find solutions if they need it, but basically what you hear here is not an endorsement of anything. So once we get the legal stuff out of the way, we'll get rock and roll here. When we look at the United States, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, CISA, has basically defined 16 critical infrastructures. And by critical infrastructure, we mean something, if it goes down, everybody has a bad day. And that really applies, right, to when we talk about governments and municipalities, because, it's one thing if a water main breaks, but it's another thing if the water system might be poisoned or a tree takes out a transformer, but a power grid is taken down. We can go through this list, and that's what I say. I could spend a day with you, and we could go into example after example to scare you. But, the bottom one is if a long line at the DMV, but what if all public services are down? I mean, I went through Atlanta with the ransomware years ago when everything was locked down. So when we look at cyber attacks by industry, we can see all these industries, and it's every year it's kind of the same group. And you can see such things as finance, you can see energy, you can see healthcare, you can see government in there. And this is just ransomware attacks, not other attacks. And we've already heard the FBI say basically that China hackers are burrowed into all our energy grids, our water treatment plants, our transportation networks, with the goal of being able to make America have a very bad day, cutting off our power, our phones, ports and airports. And again, I was just in El Salvador and Morocco and Singapore talking with the for the United Nations, talking about very specific examples in air transportation, talking to some of the best airports in the world about some of these very things. And so when we look at it, when we talk about municipalities, they are far from exempt. Like I said, Atlanta, but you can see a heat map of how municipalities are being attacked by ransomware. And the point being is that we want to have trust in our government. And trust is something that it's hard to earn and it's very simple to lose. And so what kind of things would we be looking at? Well, when we look at assets, there's tangible and intangible assets. And when we talk about intangible assets, the biggest thing is reputational loss. And so, reputational loss, we see that there's a whole thing with management time to clean up all of these things and the cost and legal ramifications. So Warren Buffett said, trust is like the air we breathe. When it's present, nobody really knows, but when it's absent, everybody notices. So if we are involved with trust and we want to do things different, then we have to realize that when it comes to cybersecurity, for example, protecting our infrastructure, protecting our government services, cybersecurity is a team sport. In the past, cybersecurity was always relegated to IT, but one of the things we have to understand is cybersecurity is really going to be at the CISO level, because what we're talking about here is risk. We're talking about not just a technology, but actually, is there a return on investment? What does it cost to bring our utilities and pay ransomware demands, et cetera? So when we talk about emerging technologies, there are things that AI really can do for us. Okay. So this is something called Riverside, keeps popping up in my feed. And it's something that's supposed to be, pretty much click and simple with your iPhone or cell phone, and you can create podcasts. So from a perspective of just about any company or the government, you could put together simple public service announcements or create a public service website instructions or do podcasts to inform the public or illustrations of impending road alignments or construction. So, AI provides with a lot of quick, easy things to do. Government agencies have to look at a lot of bids and contracts and RFIs and RFQs and things like that. And there's already applications where you can dump in all of the information that came from the vendors or suppliers. And you can just ask it, compare the service levels, give me pros and cons. What's the ROI? Which company would you recommend? So there's a lot of things that AI and these emerging technologies can already do, right? But one of the things we see is AI versus AI, because we already see all of these attacks coming along, and we don't have well, one of the questions, I guess, is why do we keep having all these attacks, and why can't we do something about it? One reason is that we're about 500,000 cybersecurity professionals short in the United States. And so it's very hard to find those individuals who can work with companies or municipalities or government agencies. Really, when you look at it, the federal government absorbs a huge majority of these very highly trained professionals. And you can see in the worldwide, we're about 1.3 million short when it comes to cybersecurity. So one of the things we see, the positive aspect of AI, is that we can supplement our cyber teams with AI cyber. So, the slide said AI versus AI. So it helps that AI can supplement and actually be looking at our systems and doing the security work for us. Things that AI can do, faster detection, phishing, behavioral analysis, network security, etc. But as fast as we are defending against the attackers and the hackers are using AI just as quickly to come up with ways around our defenses. So let's move on to AI ethics, right? So, okay, we love AI. Everybody's trying to use AI. When we look at the market, it goes up because AI is positive today. It goes down tomorrow because everybody's afraid of AI. But really, when we're talking about AI, AI can't work without data, right? We've already said that one of the biggest risks is that we have to turn over our data to a company in order to be able to work with that company. And how a company protects that data from a cybersecurity perspective or a privacy perspective, or even using that data to do their own work is very important. But is data what we're talking about? And that's what a lot of people get confused. We're talking about data. Are we talking about information? Are we talking about knowledge? Are we talking about wisdom? And data is not the same as information. Data is simply a collection of numbers and facts. Data is raw. It's unprocessed, like a collection of temperature readings. Information is where you take that data and you can organize it and structure it, and you can see that, oh, temperature has increased from about 30 degrees or 20 something degrees over 3 hours. Knowledge is where you take the information and you derive insights, okay? And then you can say, wow, it looks like there might be a heat wave approaching. And then wisdom is where you use the knowledge and intelligence to make a sound judgment. Wow, if a heat wave is approaching, maybe we should tell our people out in the field that they need to take cover, they need to drink more water, they need to be careful because of heat exhaustion, etc. So that is kind of the way data moves from just raw information that's collected into wisdom. And so what kind of data can AI analyze? It can analyze just about everything. Text data, audio data, video data. The data can be structured like in a spreadsheet. It can be unstructured like images and video. It can be labeled. It can be unlabeled. And it can be like sensor data collected from temperature sensors, accelerometers, GPS, which will come into play in an example a little bit later. But what are the issues with AI? Well, it can be expensive. Is it accurate? Is the information in the data that you've collected current? Is it context aware when you ask it the question? Is it sending you back the information that you're really looking for? Safety, scalability, bias. There could be outliers in there that can skew your data, and then the filter rules you put in place. I'm not going to go through this, but this is just kind of defining each of those things. And there's no such thing as completely unbiased data. We know, particularly in the academic arena, in medical space, when they're trialing new drugs, new treatments, new surgeries, etc., we can already see from years of experience there that there's an implicit subconscious bias in data. And that's one of the reasons that we say when you're using AI, humans always have to be in the mix. There have to be human eyes, both in the data, in the intelligence that it gives you, in the instructions that it spits out, and someone really needs to analyze it. When we look, for example, with medical research, for example, who is the primary target of medical research? Middle-aged white men. Okay, so that's where most of the testing, most of the research is done for new drugs and new therapies. Well, we already see that we have an issue there with a bias on race or gender or age or ethnicity, etc. And so, for example, an age bias, right? If everything is tested primarily on middle-aged white men, well, how do you take a drug for a 200-pound man and take that into a pediatric hospital and take that into a child that is, 40 pounds, 30 pounds, a newborn, etc. So that's why you have people like clinical pediatric pharmacists, like that handsome young man over there in the right. We call him Dr. Phil. He's my youngest. And he's at the Children's Hospital in Salt Lake, and he rounds with the doctors, and he can take that drug that was meant for an adult and compound it down for the size and the age of the child. So that's where we go back to, okay, here's the result, but here's how eyes on that result have to be there to create the safety, to create the right formula. Data rarely tells the whole story. It can be easily manipulated to fit a desired narrative. Another bias. This is a picture where data was collected, and this was put into an article, and it talked about Iraq's bloody toll. And if you look at that picture, it shows that deaths are increasing and the war is taking a heavier toll. That's what they wanted you to see. But this is the same data. This is exactly the same data put together. These are U.S. military deaths and the U.S. and civilian deaths. But when you look at the actual trends, the trend is down. Deaths are decreasing. But if you put it together and flip it around, look how it's presented there. It really gives you this visceral image of something that is really not happening when you really get eyes on the data. You need to beware of data presented without context, right? Because it can lead to misinterpretations. You can go right now and you can contact Twitter and say, I want all your information. And Twitter can say, all right, you get it all. So N equals all when you start putting it into your AI model. But what is it that you're really wanting to get? So Twitter says we've got 330 million active users. We've got 187 million daily users. 73% are 18 to 34 years old. Perfect, right? We've got all the data. We've got 18 to 34-year-olds. And now let's put in whatever it is we want to ask those questions. Well, men make up 60% of the database. Okay. So now we know we already have a minority of women. U.S. has the largest number of Twitter users. So we're excluding a large portion of the world. They're more highly educated. So if we're looking for blue collar or other type job entries, we already see that maybe that's not. And then we see that they actually have a higher income. They're most likely to identify as Democrats. And believe it or not, the majority, the highest rating is Hispanic. All right. So what is it you want to get out of your database? So you can already see there's some implicit biases in the data, even though you've got all the data, right? So understanding the limitations and potential biases in data is crucial for accurate interpretation. Here's an example where a municipality in Oregon said, we are creating an app, an AI app called City Rover. Citizens can download it. And as people drive around the city, AI collects the data and reports pothole locations. How does this work? Well, if you have a smartphone, your smartphone already has an altimeter, it has a GPS location, it has an accelerometer, it has vibration analysis, may have visual recording capability. So you drive around and your phone gets shaken up and bounced up and down, it sends a GPS signal back that says, right here on this road, there's something that probably needs to be fixed because I just got all shook up as I was driving around. Sounds great. Sounds like a useful tool for a municipality to fix something that really irritates citizens. So what's the bias? Who got fixed? Whose part of the city got their potholes fixed? Not the part of the city where the residents didn't have a cell phone, they didn't have a car, they only take public transportation, or they have to ride a bike, or they walk, or they could not afford to just drive around recreationally. So which side of town got fixed? The rich side of town, right? Those that could afford, but those who are least likely to afford it, the city was biased towards them, unintentionally, of course, right? But that's what the data showed them. So data should always be accompanied by a degree of skepticism and encouraging that further investigation. Remember, eyes on it. Is it real? Is it not? We've already seen in courts where court cases, the lawyers have actually used AI to defend their position, citing court cases that don't even exist. And all the way here into the Georgia Court of Appeals, a divorce case. The 5 cases were cited in the lower court, and the wife went back and appealed. And finally, they did realize that, yep, none of those cases really existed, that a paralegal had gone out and asked ChatGPT, and ChatGPT, wanting to be a nice friend and, make you happy, came up with 5 hallucinated cases. We've actually seen large law firms, 3 lawyers in DC, got fined by the court, could have lost their license because, again, they cited cases that did not exist. It's so easy nowadays to create images that are fake. I don't know, this is one of my favorites. If you've gone out and watched the Talking Baby podcast, there's talking animals, there are politicians that are made to look young, and they're talking, and there's all kinds of videos of how easy it is. But, you can just download a software now, and all of these pictures, those people don't exist, right? So this is how easy now with AI, in order to convince people that things they think are true are not. Like this poor financial person in Japan that was contacted and told to send 25 million yen immediately to this company. And he thought something was wrong. And so he questioned it, and he got on a Teams call, and CEO and the CFO and all of these people were on there, and they convinced him that no, this was real. He really needed to do it. He transferred the money, and come to find out, everybody on the call were deepfake AI individuals. So we can see from an ethics standpoint, we're trying to do the right thing, but we are fooled into doing exactly the opposite. So AI governance, what needs to be put in place? Every data carries inherent biases, and it's our responsibility. We are, whoever the company is using the data and using the AI, we're on the hook for that, right? So we can see that a lot of companies, the first thing is that they're not asking it. They're taking our data and using it without our permission, okay? So we've already seen that in names that you would recognize. We got companies that will hide the fact that you can opt out, but they make it very difficult for you to opt out. You have to go through a number of steps to say, I want to opt out. So in essence, you've opted in until you opted out. This is on the right is a very confidential report that I provide clients when I'm doing an assessment and giving them a rating. And my computer froze up one time, and so I did Control-Alt-Delete, and we'll see what's going on in the processes. And lo and behold, I don't know how clearly you can see it, but it says Microsoft Word, artificial or AI host for Microsoft Windows. There was AI running in the background on my confidential report, and I did not know that, right? So what kind of risks are being unleashed on organizational data? But basically three areas in general, and Andrea probably will speak more to this later, but when we talk about infringement of intellectual property rights, if you sign a non-disclosure, for example, you could be disclosing confidential information. Imagine doing high-level research on some cutting-edge drug, and you do AI and you're using AI to kind of come up with solutions and all, and somebody else across the world does goes into AI and asks the question, and there comes up your cutting edge information. Yeah. So are you using a public or a private AI tool, for example? And compliance with laws and regulations. The reason that we can get away right now with so much is because it's a new technology and we're in the Wild West, and our federal government and our state governments will say, we basically give you a social license. We allow you to do this with the thought that you're going to handle it properly. But we know that's already happening to where people are questioning the social license and questioning state legislators, local legislators, the federal government to put restrictions in place. And so one of the things you have to be careful of where you're using your data, where you're storing your data, what company, where you are in the world, because there are already some legal restraints and restrictions out there about using and training and prompting models with personally identifiable information. And so one of the things that I do is I would look for things like an AI framework if I'm working with a company and help them to become compliant with the laws and the legislation, as well as certain cyber frameworks to protect that data. Because again, the reason I start with cybersecurity is because you have an innate burden, right? If you're collecting all this data to protect that data. Nobody's going to give you data. Nobody wants you to have their data if you can't protect that data. And so we put a cyber framework around it. And so what key takeaways, as I've said, when you do AI, it has to be a team approach. This is not the techies, the geeks, the IT people. This is a team. This is cross-functional. You need to have legal. You need to have security. You need to have governance. You need to have compliance. You need to get the end users, the stakeholders. You need to keep your board of directors, and the C-suite informed. You need to select your cases thoughtfully, right, where it will you add real value and an ROI. You need to keep humans at the center, avoid data bias, etc. And of course, ensure data privacy and security. I'm about out of time, but what I want to share with you here is that there are so many vendors out there right now selling services. One day there'll be a shakeup, right? And a lot of things, kind of like the dot-com bubble, a lot of people that have great ideas will fall by the wayside. But you're in the middle of it now, and you're trying to decide what vendors you want to use. And so I'm just going to walk through these slides real quickly, but this is just a process. When you're talking to a vendor, you want to make sure that that vendor has data security and privacy at the forefront, number one, of what their software or their capabilities or whatever can give you. Technical performance and accuracy. These are things you can ask them to show you how they do these very specific things. And again, like I said, I'm not going to go through them, but they'll be on the website in the recording that you can come back and take a look at this. Model transparency and governance, auditability, for example, can you verify? Can you have human oversight? Vendor viability, references, how mature are you? How well it integrates into some of your current solutions. A lot of people bolt on things afterwards, and you really need to make sure that it is designed to work with your systems, because if it's just bolted on, you've wasted time and effort. Contract support, what is their liability and exit strategy and support and training for their product? And can they actually provide a proof of return of investment and a business impact that really will help you in your endeavor? So red flags to watch for if they're over promising, that it never makes mistakes, that you really can't see into how the data is being handled and the tech is not really proven. So I know, as I said, strap in and hold on. We flew through this, but again, you'll have the recording to go back. So I hope you got something out of it and learned some things today. And with that, I am going to turn it over to Andrea. Let's see if I can stop sharing here. There we go.
Andrea, you're muted.
Thank you. I'll be discussing the legal and regulatory implications of artificial intelligence, particularly where AI intersects with legal work and government decision making. It's no secret that AI already delivers real efficiency benefits, but without proper governance, it can also introduce legal risk. And my focus is not whether to use AI. We know that we're well down that path, but how to regulate its use responsibly, while still preserving accountability and ethics. I'll begin with a short hypo to ground us in a real world scenario. And then we'll walk through the legal and ethical implications and then translate those into issues into a regulator's lens. And then review how states and international actors are approaching AI regulation. And then we'll close with a roadmap built around 4 governance pillars that I think will help frame thinking moving forward. And just like the disclaimer that Dr. Barker gave, it's important to know that this is quickly evolving and changes from day to day, certainly month to month and year to year. So what I discussed today might not be relevant shortly. So I'm going to end with resources and best practices that you can use to help you stay up to date. Okay, I'm going to start with a hypothetical. As I'm reading this scenario, I want you all to think about these 4 questions. How did the errors make it into the final memo? Was the associate's reliance on the system without proper training or thorough review a contributing factor? What are the potential consequences for the client and the legal team? And then what steps should be taken to address and correct these missteps? And they'll be on the screen if you want to reference them. A first-year associate recently began volunteering with a law firm on a pro bono criminal matter case involving a client facing serious felony charges. As part of discovery, the defense team receives a massive production request from the prosecution massive production from the prosecution. Over 30,000 documents, including police reports, body camera footage, transcripts, witness statements, text messages, and handwritten notes. The supervising attorney, overwhelmed by the volume of material and the tight deadlines, approaches the first-year associate and suggests using a new document review system to expedite the process. The associate has overheard colleagues discussing this system, which uses machine learning and advanced algorithms to identify potentially exculpatory evidence, inconsistencies in witness statements, and procedural red flags. The system is licensed to the firm, but the associate, who started just recently, has not yet attended any formal training on how to use it effectively. Despite this, the associate decides to proceed with the system, knowing that it could reduce the time required for initial document review by at least 30%. The associate uploads the entire set of documents into the system, which quickly generates reports, including several key findings, Brady material, discrepancies, and relevant legal issues. The system also can draft initial case memos and outline for motions. Relying on the system's Output, the associate briefly reviews the generated reports and uses the system to draft a preliminary case memo. The memo, which is just summarizing the key evidence and potential defense strategies, is then submitted to the supervising attorney for further review, and then it is used in ongoing defense of the client. The memo is filed with the court, and it is discovered that it contains a misstatement of facts and incorrect case citations. Okay, again, the key issue isn't that AI made a mistake. Errors are expected, but the real failure was the absence of controls. There was no training, no verification, no audit trail, and insufficient human supervision. Once AI output entered the memo, it became part of the official record. And existing ethical duties already govern this scenario. Competence requires understanding the tools used. Confidentiality requires safeguarding client data. And supervision requires meaningful review. And ABA Formal Opinion 512 confirms these duties apply fully to generative AI. So, did the attorney violate the duty of competence? I think a lot of these answers are going to be obvious. It was a pretty extreme case, but like Dr. Ruck already pointed out, these unfortunately are happening quite often. So, I think it's really helpful to walk through just this analysis of what was violated and why, and then later translate that into the regulatory context. So competent representation requires the legal knowledge, skill, thoroughness, and preparation reasonably necessary for the representation. And then comment 8 to ABA model rule expands on competence and technological advancements by describing what practicing attorneys must do to stay current with the changes. To maintain the requisite knowledge and skill, a lawyer should keep abreast of changes in the law, including benefits and risks associated with relevant technology, and engage in continuing studying and education. So, Model Rule 1.1 suggests that attorneys should only use technology that they are competent to use and understand the implications of it. So, prior to implementing the technology within the firm or before using it, the supervising attorney and first-year associate are required to take steps to learn about how the platform operates. And there was nothing in the facts indicating that either attorney participated in the training. It would be beneficial for the firm to consult with an AI expert to fully understand how the system operates and how this impacts the final work product, because it is a lawyer's responsibility to be abreast with the benefits and risks associated with using it. The attorney, at the very least, should understand how the system is reviewing the documents. But of course, the attorney also should have checked the work and the worked product, because there needs to be, like Dr. Barker also pointed out, like some sort of human oversight. They only skimmed the reports generated by the system, and ABA requires lawyers using AI when drafting a document to run reports, to use enough preparation and thoroughness to match the complexity and consequences of the matter at hand, instead of putting all the trust into the algorithms used to review documents associated with the case involving a serious felony charge. The associate and the supervising attorney should have reviewed the reports to look for any missing information or red flags. Okay, so the duty of confidentiality. A lawyer shall not reveal information relating to the representation of a client unless the client gives informed consent or the disclosure is implicitly authorized in order to carry out the representation. So Model Rule 1.6 states that a lawyer cannot reveal confidential information unless they have informed consent from the client. And it further states that lawyers must make reasonable efforts to prevent mistakenly disclosing information of a client without proper authorization. Here, the pro bono firm would need to consider where the documents are uploaded to and whether it is safe. The rule further suggests that prior to using AI platforms, firm and attorneys should understand the risks posed by uploading the documents to the system and whether confidentiality is at risk. It would be, again, beneficial for both parties if the client understood that an AI system is being used and the measures that are being taken to ensure confidentiality. Supervision, but attorney supervision as well as candor to the court are core duties triggered by using AI. Partners, managers, supervising attorneys are responsible or who hold direct supervisory authority over other lawyers have a duty to ensure that lawyers uphold the model ethical rules. And further to that, there are certain non-delegible duties that belong to attorneys. And although they can consult another lawyer or expert, the attorney is still obligated to oversee the work. So whether that be the machine or the other lawyer that is conducting the work, they have to be knowledgeable about what is going on and still double check the work. And then the duty of candor, you cannot make a false statement of fact or law to the court. And if you do inadvertently mistake the law or a material fact, you must correct it. And like we've said, the lawyers in this case, in this hypo, did not scrutinize the memo or facts used to build the case. Instead, they just relied on the machine to do the thinking and use misleading arguments and facts. So this scenario mirrors agency AI use when AI informs benefits, licensing, and enforcement decisions. Similar failures create due process risks. Courts care whether decisions are explainable, contestable, and lawfully made, and not whether a human or AI generated them. So due process and equal protection concerns concern biased decisions or tools that cannot be fully, or tools that make decisions that cannot be fully explained. This happens in the law enforcement context, screening tenants or monitoring public housing, terms and conditions of employment, and like allocation of resources. When they are used, we need to make sure that we can go back and look at the AI record and how they thought through how it thought through the context of the problem and generated its overall report. And there needs to be some sort of like public transparency. So inventories, notices, when AI is being used, is the agency able to solicit feedback from the public or the affected community members, whether that be through surveys, consultations, observations, public observations of people using AI systems, or observations of how the decisions AI is making is translated into the real world. Public hearings or meetings as well could be a good way to solicit this feedback. And then if there are certain people or communities that are negatively impacted, they must be notified. There are a couple of federal considerations that we can already look at. OMB M2410 requires minimum safeguards for rights impacting and safety impacting AI. And the key mechanics of this memo are implementing some sort of chief AI officer and governance boards that will oversee the use of AI, and then AI use case inventory, so conducting at least annual reviews of how AI is used within an agency or an organization, and then stop use deadlines if safeguards are not met. So that would be like timelines that help agencies and organizations efficiently and effectively implement practices that will protect against the inadvertent consequences of using AI. Okay, state regulation. States are taking varied but converging approaches. I'm going to talk about Colorado and then Texas. Colorado focuses on high-risk AI and discrimination, while Texas emphasizes governance, documentation, and innovative sandboxes. And similar to the analysis in the legal field, the common thread is accountability and not bans of using AI. So Colorado's act became effective just this month. It's a consumer protection regulation regulating high-risk AI systems, and it places obligations on developers and deployers, which include enhanced transparency requirements, and it applies a risk-based approach and applies a reasonable care standard for developers and deployers. Developers must make available high-level summaries of data uses data used to train the system, information on uses, and risks of discrimination. Whereas Texas Responsible Artificial Intelligence Governance Act sets forth disclosure requirements for government entity AI developers and deployers, and it outlines prohibited uses of AI and establishes civil penalties for violations. It's considered a significant business-friendly approach to AI regulation, which kind of contrasts with more restrictive laws such as Colorado's, and it focuses on intent rather than disparate impact. Okay, some international approaches. The EU's AI Act imposes binding obligations on high-risk systems with phased compliance. So the high risk kind of mirrors the Colorado Act. The European Union is seen or was seen before states started implementing their own regulation. One of the furthest along in developing a comprehensive legislative response to governing AI. And the AI Act classifies AI systems based on the risk presented to users and uses that risk level to determine the amount of regulation. So the Colorado Act, Texas, and international regulations can teach us what we need to think about. First is the risk framework. Framework is designed for high-risk AI like Colorado and EU, whereas in Texas, the prohibitions are keyed to specific practices and there is no formal tiering. The actors covered most focus on developers and deployers in the states. However, the EU does have a broader approach, and the act includes importers and distributors. And then transparency to consumers and the public, mandatory notice like Texas and the EU for government entities that are using AI, or a more narrowed approach like Colorado, which requires a consumer notice for high risk. And then, like I said, the discrimination standard, so the high threshold of intent or high threshold intent like Texas, meaning the standard is harder to meet, or impact focused like Colorado. And then the timeline. Are you giving businesses and government agencies time to implement the regulations, such as the sandbox approach in Texas? A practical governance roadmap rests on privacy, confidentiality, accountability, and supervision. Frameworks like the NIST AI Risk Management Framework help put these pillars or help put safe practices around AI in place without freezing innovation or without freezing innovation. The framework will help identify the risks and provides actionable pathways for responsible and trustworthy AI use. And then if ethics governance is lacking, an AI ethics review board or similar board should be formed to discuss overall accountability and ethics practice, as well as other undefined areas. Third-party auditing would also be a good idea to oversee the ethical concerns and accountability measures. And they could also be put in place as a preventative measure and as a way to create transparency between the systems and the end work product. Okay, here, and I can drop these in the chat or make these slides available after the presentation, but just different areas or different places that you can go to track laws and rules as they evolve and come into effect. Different frameworks that can ground agencies and organizations in creating different rules and approaches to governing AI, and then just some court opinions and the ABA opinion and rules that I referenced throughout this or throughout the becoming a lot of different resources and research around AI, but starting small, like picking one framework to ground the agency or organization in, and then working up from that would be my recommendation. With that, I will turn it over to Jaslyn again for any questions, or just the group for any questions.
Thank you both so much. I wanted to ask a couple of Q&A questions just to help us all round out the conversation. Dr. Barker, I know you talked a little bit about it, but could you go over again some of the top red flags you're seeing when agencies should look for as they're procuring AI tools from vendors?
Well, obviously the most is that they're over-promising and under-delivering, right? They can do everything and they may not be. Do they protect the confidentiality of the data? Do they have biases already built in? Can they actually show you that they can give you what you need, that there is a return on your investment? All those things that were kind of in those last 5 or 6 slides in general. But yeah, there are so many things out there. And if you were to just go Google, is there an AI for X? And you're going to find that someone is developing it, has developed it, whatever. And so, there's a lot of, in the old days, we'd call it snake oil salesmen out there. So just be careful. You get what you pay for.
Thank you. Andrea, do you see any areas where civil rights or discrimination risk may emerge in state use of AI?
Yeah, I can see this happening in the context of law enforcement, agencies or departments using it to predict criminal behavior or to not target, or to surveillance or I guess target certain populations or communities. I can also see it in the context of tenant housing, in terms of selecting tenants or not selecting tenants based off of whatever you're training the systems to use. So I think being mindful of selecting programs or having some sort of oversight and really scrutiny of what the systems are producing.
Thank
If I
you.
could,
Yeah.
can I add one thing? Sure.
Mhm.
So one of the things we talk with municipalities about for in government agencies is FOIA, Freedom of Information Act, right? We've got 120 federal agencies receive about 1 million FOIA requests per year. And of course, it takes forever, right, to get that information back. Why? Because a person has to go in and do all that searching. With AI now, okay, that request, depending on how it is worded, can go in and search all that information and bring it back pretty quickly. So FOIA requests could actually be answered more quickly. Positive. What is the negative on this from a civil rights perspective? It could bring back more information, right, that is either wrong or private information that doesn't need to be disclosed. And so then one of the questions is the FOIA request itself now subject to FOIA, right? So you could say, well, what did you use to bring that data back? And what was the results, even though you pulled out part of it to answer my question? But what other information did you collect? And there could be some, discrimination or civil rights or privacy confidentiality things there. So that's another area to look at.
Thank you. And do either of you have any thoughts about how accountability should be handled when using AI to make AI-driven decisions rely on third-party systems?
Well, I'll start, but having a team visibility. That's why we say you put a team together, right? And you have multiple eyes. You don't rely on the programmer to get it right, because that programmer is either going to be having a bias because of ignorance. He or she doesn't know something they need to put in there, or a literal bias, as Andrea just said, talking about, police, for example. There might be a bias there that is built into the program that hurts certain people's civil rights or whatever. So you need to have multiple eyes inputting on the result and how it's used, a team approach.
Yeah, and I will just within that team multiple different perspectives. So like civil rights, governance, tech, so that you're coming at it from all angles and not overlooking some of the possible consequences of utilizing systems in new context where you might be drastically impacting a group of people without knowing.
You've got to keep in mind that the systems can only give you back information based on what you put in it. So garbage in equals garbage out. And the other thing is that, as I always say, when you're using these LLMs, they make stuff up, right? There is hallucination, which I've talked about, Andrew's talked about. And so, that's why you've got to have that team approach on it to really say, is this real?
And are any of you seeing any upcoming legal or regulatory AI trends that states should be preparing for now? I know the landscape is ever evolving, but do you see any trends that states should be preparing for?
I think one big thing coming up is just going to be preemption. So federal legislation, um, preempting or making the state legislation obsolete. I don't think that's going to happen within the next couple of months or weeks, but I do think that's something that states need to keep their eyes out for, is just the federal conversation and what could be tied to funding and just stuff like that.
Yeah, and from a more focused perspective, I see that there's probably going to be eventually legal penalties for injury, right? We already see that there's false stuff going on in the courts. And so can people sue for damages? I don't know. I see that there's probably going to be, you need to put privacy statements on websites. You need to have a way for people to opt out with their data, right? And then consumer notices, kind of like HIPAA. Every year we get the HIPAA statement. Here's how we use your data. Here's how we keep it private, confidential, etc. I could see that on a more practical level on, at the local level.
Well, thank you so much, both Dr. Barker and Andrea. I don't see any questions in the chat or in the Q&A function. So again, I just wanted to thank our panelists for joining us today. Thank you for sharing your insights. Thank you for the audience for joining us. As I said earlier, all registered attendees will receive a follow-up email with recording links and any additional resources from today's session. If you are celebrating today, happy Friday the 13th, happy Valentine's Day. I hope you join us next March the 13th. So it will also be a Friday the 13th for our next session, Communicating with the Public in a Polarized Environment. We're going to discuss some de-escalation and conflict management techniques for responding to constituents. So with that, I hope you all have a great afternoon and enjoy the weekend.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.